Hello and welcome to The Bridge. My name is Brandon. And I'm joined again today by my co-host Zach, and we have another album to review. I'm very excited to talk about this today because I've probably put hours and hours into listening to this album. So
Oh yeah,
yeah,
wow.
so this is probably the most listened to album yet for me in terms of before one of these episodes. I got to it early and I got to it over a few times over. But what are
You
you
said
drinking
what
here
you.
today?
Today I'm drinking some East German beer. Very delicious.
But go ahead, what you're asking.
On the last podcast, you said you had big opinions about this record, so I almost wish that I didn't hear you say that before I listened to it,
Okay.
because it made me come with certain expectations, I guess, and I don't know if they were met.
Okay, sure.
And also, this record's only 30 minutes long, like 32 minutes long, and you've listened to it how many times?
I've definitely listened to it front to back a good 6 times.
Oh, wow.
So it's a few hours of listening has gone into this. Yeah, I'll get more part of that is because it is 30 minutes and it's in that Brandon sweet spot where under 40 minutes is kind of like my key album length is where I prefer to see them. So 30 minutes,
Uh-huh.
perfect for me. Just longer than an EP and enough to be an LP. That's my
Well,
sweet spot.
if it sounds like I'm speaking out of my ass, then at least you're standing on good authority.
I don't know. We'll get to that because this was a roller coaster listening experience, and that's why I had to listen to it so much. Is because my perspective changed a few times, my opinions went up and down, and I had to take a break from it and come back to it and readjust because there was a lot of biases going into this album for me. Because I am
Eh,
aware of this band and I'm aware of an album they released back in 2012 called Attack on Memory. But I guess I don't know if I've even mentioned the name of the album yet.
No, neither have we mentioned the name of the band.
No, I don't
Even
think
though
we
it's
have.
the title
We
of the
just jumped right
podcast,
into it.
but yeah.
The album we're talking about this week is Cloud Nothings, and the name of their album is The Shadow I Remember. So I got a little ahead of ourselves. A little excited, obviously, for getting into this. Yeah, I went up and down because I'm aware of that album, and that album is one of my favorite albums of all time, just bar none. I love that album.
Yeah, you introduced me to the band through that record maybe a couple of years ago now,
Yeah,
and I remember listening to it and really liking it. And then I guess it just fell in the backlog, and I kind of forgot about it, and then listened to it again to recontextualize myself with the band this week. And man, that is such a great record. It's so
absolutely.
outstanding that I think other records by the band may sort of live in its shadow.
It's hard. It's hard not to live in its shadow. Honestly,
Yeah.
it's one of those situations with a band where they have this super well received album, kind of like Nas, maybe if you're a rap head, where they have
Mhm.
Illmatic, and then these
Yeah.
other albums kind of are constantly in the shadow of that album. But to give it a little more context, we're talking about a Cleveland, Ohio band. Band is loose. The lead singer, Dylan Baldy, is actually more or less the entire encompassing of that band. It's kind of like
He's the
a Nine Inch Nails,
mastermind.
Trent Reznor kind of situation.
Yeah, he's the mastermind behind the project, and then there's just different actors coming in, filling in for the band.
I think he's got a set group that he is part of the band, but maybe this help explain a little better. Is when he started this band, he used to write. He was in college and he would write songs, and he'd post them to MySpace under random aliases, random bands that he just made up. And one of
Uh-huh.
those that he submitted under was Cloud Nothings. But it's just made up band. It's just him, making the music himself. And you can kind of tell that listen to the album that he eventually ends up releasing under that title. But what happens is a promoter contacts him and wants him to open up for a show in New York. And then suddenly he's like, I don't even have a band. Like, what's going on here? Um,
Shit.
So
My big break. I have no bandmates.
So quickly he gets everything together, finds a bandmate, starts practicing, drops out of college, and just does this thing full time. He just kind of like
Yeah, fuck you, fuck uni. Yeah, I'm gonna be a rock star.
exactly. That's kind of this story. He's just like made up some bands, made a good enough song that he got some attention, and then he kind of had to pull his weight, and he made the band from there. So that band that he created, with the exception of one member, it's basically been Cloud Nothings the whole time.
Okay, I understand now. And from what I understand, just reading a little bit about this record specifically, is that the record is a sort of nostalgic. It is a little bit of a revisionist piece that is nostalgic for those early. I think what I read was bedroom days, so I guess that would be like his college
Yeah.
days when he was putting music out on MySpace. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So and the record really, in the way it's produced and mixed and the tight length of the tracks, most of the tracks like 2-3 minutes, one coming in at under 2 minutes, and like we said already, the album's only 32 minutes from front to back, and it's 11 tracks. It's a very tight record, and very much is not unfinished feel, but it's got like a retro feel to it, at least in my opinion.
A little bit of rawness, maybe.
Yeah, it's raw.
The first album, well, I believe you told me you listened to, he came after he got a record deal after, he created Cloud Nothings in 2009. First album comes out 2010. Like and it's a lot, it's different than this album, even though there's this claim for nostalgia there. The first album has a lot of rawness to it in its production techniques and in how it comes out. It's very scuzzy and kind of shoegazy. Structurally kind of similar, but I'd say it's very different from his other work. Even Attack on Memory.
Turning On, you're referring to the
Yes,
initial
Turning
release?
On. Yes, it's initial album. I found it to be very noisy and scuzzy and raw and more earnest. Kind of like that from the heart approach. You can tell it's rough around the edges and not quite Attack on Memory. And it's even like different, almost like a genre shift between there and Attack on Memory, just because of how the production kind of changes so much. How did you said you listened to the first one? How did you kind of think about it?
So the first one for me, I agree with everything you're saying. However, I did find that it's a pretty big record and 13 tracks. And even though it is very noisy and very loud and sort of scuzzy and raw, it also takes its moments to take a pause and take a breath, and it slows things down. Whereas this record, The Shadow I Remember, a couple tracks shorter, but it's sort of in your face the whole time. The tempo never really lets up. And for that reason, I found it to be not have as much diversity, and it can be a little bit difficult to distinguish one song from the next. I found, and there was one song I really liked the guitar riff, but it was hard to find what track it was in the track list because as I was going through all the songs, like, they all sounded so similar.
Right. I actually agree with you. I don't want to jump too headline into how my first listen went because I think that's a story in itself. First, I need to tell the story of Attack on Memory a little bit.
For sure.
So that comes out in 2012, and it is a classic album in my opinion, a favorite of mine. A record that I would note firstly for the fact that the noise rock legend himself, Steve Albini, produced it. And if you don't know who that is, and you need a quick resume, this is the guy Kurt Cobain personally sought out to produce In Utero. So he's responsible for In Utero. He is responsible for some Slint albums, notably Tweez, The Jesus Lizard, Melt Banana, Mogwai we talked about in our last episode. He's also produced for them. He's produced for McLusky, The Stooges, Son O, and of course he's responsible for his own bands like Shellac and Big Black. he's like a powerhouse. You know, he's my favorite producer, probably Strictly.
Also, it should be noted that they returned to him to produce this record.
Right. I think that's a funny fact that I'll get to it in a bit. The Tech and Memory album, I would say, I really enjoyed because of the crazy builds and the energetic breakdowns, and the good pacing, emotional highs, catchy emo rock tracks that kind of offset some of the other interesting ideas and instrumental tracks. And there's a different flavor as you go throughout the album, and it's very diverse, and its tracks really stand out, I think.
Well, that track, "Wasted Days," is
a powerhouse.
it distinguishes the album amongst all the rest. You know, just based on that one track. Not to say that the rest of the album isn't good, because it is, but they do so many things in that one track.
Right. That one track is like their magnum opus, honestly. I believe it's their best song.
Yeah.
Handsome throughout all discography. So 9 years later, we have this album. Obviously, there's albums between those and here. They're actually pretty prolific. I believe this is their 8th album.
Every couple of years they're releasing new music, yeah, so I think you're right.
Yeah, I even listened to their 2018 record, in passive, back when that came out. So I guess I'll get into how my first listen went. When I commented and talked about this album and how I had a lot of opinions to give on our last recording, I had only listened to it once. So this first listen was kind of what I was basing this off of. I hated this album. I fucking hated this album through and through after my first listen. I got 20 minutes in and I was upset. I was in a bad mood. I went into this album in a really good mood and I left in a really bad mood. It just went so bad.
The first time I listened to it also, it bummed me out.
Yeah. Because
I thought it was super derivative and very samey, like very one note.
Mm-hmm. I wrote down a few comments. So I mentioned how I really enjoyed the breakdowns in that original album, and going into this album, I think I heard two breakdowns worth anything. I believe they're on the opening track Oslo and The Spirit Of. I thought those breakdowns were pretty good, pretty good, but they were just all right. There's nothing on here, and it's like terrible to compare the two, but there's no wasted days here. Not in this album at all.
No.
Nothing even coming close to it. So it's like this album like teases me almost. It gives me these short builds sometimes in like those two tracks, but it never fully delivers in the way I want it to. I kept on thinking like his vocals never felt this nasally to me before. Like it's never come off so weird and like hard to digest before. I don't know if I was just in a bad mood and I was just kind of like picking at all of it. I was just kind of sat there listening to the album, defeated, and I noted, I guess they're just a rock band now with some pop vocals. I guess that's what this album is, and I guess that's what they've turned into. And I just was so tired of it. They have some. Are they writing like great rock hooks on this album? There's a few okay ones. There's some bad ones too. They're almost trying to be anthemic in some ways. Like I kind of got like a Dookie Green Day kind of like I wish I was kind of feel off some of this, but like it just didn't. It just wasn't. I wish they would create more sprawling builds and create some longer songs. You can keep some of these choruses that they got in here, and the gangle guitar and this kind of like that pop rock tinge, but push the vocal performance and into more that strained emo range I'm used to more, like on Wasted Days he does, and on some of these tracks he does in the later ends, but they're so few and far between. It just felt so subdued and safe. Didn't feel like they were saying anything or writing anything that needed to be heard when I was listening to this the first time. Those were kind of like my notes when I took away the first time I listened to this album.
So you didn't like the nasally vocal delivery on a song like "The Spirit of," for instance.
Oh, those were the songs. The Spirit of I note because I believe there's a time he goes into that strained kind of nasally emo range, where like he's kind of like putting more effort into it, and like it's a more emotionally tinged delivery. I love that. That's like my favorite. But there's like
that track's.
Go ahead.
That track's like a hardcore emo throwback,
Right.
and the constant refrain. How does it go? No way out. He keeps on. That's the refrain in the song, and he gets very nasally.
Mm-hmm.
And the louder he goes, the more nasally he becomes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nasally. It's almost like it becomes almost a whine.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the track grew on me the more I listened to it.
Spirit
and
of is
his
one of
vocal.
those songs that I ended up coming away with being more positive than other songs on. I would say there's almost like a Blink-182 feel sometimes with the type of nasal he delivers, which is not a good thing to me. There's like three kinds of singing on this album. There's this his standard, chorus singing, verse singing, kind of like in like a regular voice, and then he's got that nasally tinged version where he gets kind of whiny, and then he gets the strained emo version. And I like the strained emo. I think his regular singing voice is okay, and then kind of like that nasally pocket annoyed me.
Okay.
So like, there's a lot coming at me here that I was trying to digest when I was listening to this album, and I actually noticed at this point, before we go too fresh further, I actually noted at this point, I wish Steve Albini produced this album. That's what I said.
He did produce this album.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I see where you're going.
So I didn't realize he had produced this album. You mentioned it to me the other day that he produced this album, and I was like, "Excuse me?" And like, I immediately went back and listened to it, and I was like, "There's no way he produced this album," and he did, because I was living in. I had to crush my own dreams a little bit, because I went back and I was like, maybe I'm just being curmudgeoned, with my listen. Maybe I should go in and give it a different shot and, kind of accept what's going on a little bit more than I have been. If Steve Albini's producing it, maybe there's more here than I heard the first time.
You were letting your expectations get in the way.
Yeah. So I was wondering how biased maybe I was being. And I went back and did some further listenings. Before we get to that, you were saying something?
Well, I was going to ask you how you thought the music corresponds to his vocal performance on some of the tracks. The Spirit of, for instance.
In what way do you mean?
For instance, we were speaking about how his voice builds towards this nasally delivery. And I found that, I wasn't super jammed on the vocals. However, I did find that the band corresponded to the build in his voice very well with their own musical build. But the problem is that the tracks are just so tight, they're so short, that those builds are so short-lived.
I noted, and kind of what you're referencing here, I felt when I went and did some further listening, and I particularly focused on the breakdowns and kind of what did I like about Attack on Memory that isn't here. It's kind of what I went back into it. Or I said, maybe I'm biased. Let's let this album stand on its own and let's not think about Attack on Memory. So I took several different approaches when I was listening to this album, trying to see where the truth was. I was trying to challenge my biases a little bit. So one thing you touch on here that I did go through and listen, I was like, okay, I really like the breakdowns. That's something I really liked about Attack on Memory. And Waste Stays, for example, it really is just like a 4-minute song with a 4-minute breakdown. That's kind of how that song is. And so I was like, okay, so the breakdown is really kind of where I think there was a lot of strength in that album. And I came back here and I was like, okay, what are the breakdowns like on this new album? And I like the breakdown Oslo, and I like the breakdown on In the Spirit of. But as you noted, some of these songs are kind of short. And I feel like they've kneecapped themselves and taken away some of these breakdowns that were so compelling, and the chance to build these songs into these emotional points. It's all kneecapped and like taken apart because like some of these songs are like 2 minutes or like 2.5 minutes that, with like one exception here, it all kind of like prevents them from being able to deliver that breakdown that I liked.
And that distinguishes each track from the rest. Because
R-
I especially find the drums, even though if I'm in the mood to listen to something loud, yeah, sure, this could be a decent record. Because the drums are just like they are remorseless. They're just trying to pound their way through the rest of the band, and they sound quite similar on every track. You know, super loud cymbals, just really fast tempo, and it's overwhelming. Not overwhelming to listen to necessarily, but it overwhelms the rest of the band.
I know what you mean. There were times where I was listening to this and I was listening to the drums, and I liked the drums in a vacuum. You know, it just on a single track, I'm listening to drums are really erratic and fast, and it feels like the drummer's like burning 100 calories a second, like he's just
Yeah,
going in, he's going crazy, and it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like the drums is a highlight, and then you go to the next song, it's kind of the same thing, and you go to the next song,
yeah.
it's kind of the same thing, and by the time you get 20 minutes, 15 minutes into this album with this kind of drum pace, and they sound great. They're all very produced, and all the hits sound really good. It's just a bit derivative and redundant, and gets old.
Yeah, it gets old. I wish they would have just one or two tracks just to split it up a little bit, like they did on their debut Turning On, like a very raw, loud album like this with very loud drums, but they have a track where they cut through the drums and sort of take a breath, have some slower riffs, and just meditate a little bit. Just take a breath. Whereas this album, it just wants to punish you from start to finish, which I get. It would be a fun album to go see a live show at, but to
Sure.
listen to it on your own, it's not such a great experience.
And Ruthless can be a positive thing in terms of how music's delivered, but I feel like this is more like the repetitive pounding that just kind of wears you down rather than something that's just an onslaught. It's
Yeah,
just too one same notey, and a song that I thought wasn't in some ways not as samey was Nothing Without You, which is second track. Um,
yeah, I agree.
Macy Stewart from the Chicago band or OHMME is on the chorus, and it's a welcome addition. I thought it helped the band stand out. Not just having a different vocalist performing their part, it just does wonders. It's not.
They
It's
should have put the track somewhere deeper in the playlist
I was
or
going
the
to say the
track
same
list.
thing.
Sorry.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you 100%. It's just like coming out of the beginning of the album. Actually, I wasn't that upset. Oslo and Nothing Without You and The Spirit of are kind of like some of the better tracks in my opinion.
I agree.
But it just kind of got harder to stomach after that. Um, but I even criticize this is it's a chorus song. Um, this and a few other songs, like in the lieu of like compelling songwriting, song structure, or even lyrics, they just choose to repeat the chorus and replace breakdowns with just another repetition of the chorus before ending the
Mhm.
song. And that feels like a lazy, uh, like song building strategy. Like you can do that for a song or two. Like if this was the only song on the track that kind of did this, or one of two, I wouldn't have been so critical of that. But like it felt like the band realized that the hook and the chorus was actually kind of good. This is probably one of the better, sounding music, and then they just even take that and just like ram it into the ground. They just repeat the chorus like over and over and over again. like a pop rock song would, and it's just like it's like even what I liked, I can find stuff that I didn't like, and it kind of annoyed me.
Uh-huh. You're right, it is very pop rockish oriented. It's almost like this is the song that they're going to market as the single
Mhm.
from this record.
So I don't dislike what's happening on this song. It's kind of like some old school emo, post-hardcore. It's fine. I like that kind of music. It's probably a highlight track on the whole album. There is a small breakdown on this, but it just kind of leads back into the chorus. I end up thinking it was okay.
Mhm.
I thought
Yeah,
Oslo was okay. I thought Spirit of was okay. I thought a lot of these songs were okay. It's Love, A Longer Moon, okay. Some of them even like kind of like lean into great. I think A Longer Moon is a great track, which is near the end. It's the second last track. Great vocals, and the initial opening is great. I love the song that the song shifts midway through. The music breathes a lot more, and the breakdown energy is great and fantastic. They took a shorter track and really brought out that Cloud Nothing's energy and hectic breakdown. Like even though it was a shorter track, they still managed to kind of like put those elements in there, which made me believe that they could do that on these other tracks, even though they're shorter. But I thought the Longer Moon was one of the only tracks that really accomplished that.
yeah, I mean, this album is more or less what I would consider hardcore emo.
Yeah, I think
And
that's that.
and it's reflected in the length of the tracks because most of them are under 3 minutes. And to tag on to what you're saying, A Longer Moon, okay, yeah, it has a little bit more space. It has some builds, but again, it's less than 3 minutes. And if they would have taken a song like that, just spaced it out longer, it
Mhm.
would be way better, especially coming off the super hardcore track, It's Love, which is one of my favorite tracks on the album because it adds some diversity to an otherwise, uh, monotonous track list or
I had
repetitive track
positive
list.
I had positive feelings about It's Love as well. But I did end up feeling like it was just so like it just cuts off once it starts getting going. You know, like there's no room to breathe. It's like they ran out of ideas for the song and then just ended it. You know, I like the creamy guitar that they added on this, which is I hadn't heard anywhere else on the album. The rhythm was different. It felt like a strong like a song structure that was different. You know, and the chorus needed a little bit of work, but it wasn't horrific. You know, there's worse on this album. I'll get into that. But then it just kind of ended for me, and it's like I just gotta let it decide. Like if this was in the middle of a better album, I would have given it a lot more uh, credence for being short. But at this point, it just felt like half song.
Undeveloped to you
Yeah,
because it came after a bunch of what feels to be half-baked ideas. Or
right.
not, I shouldn't even say half-baked, but just not fully realized.
No, I'd say half
Yeah,
baked ideas.
I
Like
mean, I like It's Love. I think it just hits hard, it's quick, it's got that hardcore snap that I expect from hardcore punk, and I think it would have an even deeper impact if the songs that came before it weren't also like tight and yeah, like just trying to do everything all at once.
right. So how did your listens go? You said the first time you listened to this, you were kind of bummed. Like, how did that progress for you?
I mean, I was bummed because you said you had a lot of opinions about it, and we had just done like a lightning round of albums, and I hadn't listened to the record before that episode. And when I listened to it, I was like, man, we should have just covered this on that show because I didn't really have a lot to say about it because there's not much to talk about. And then I listened to it again. Like none of the tracks really stood out to me, except for Oslo and Nothing Without, because Oslo was longer. It seemed more fleshed out,
Mm-hmm.
and
I
then
agree.
Nothing Without You has those backup vocals and that nice chorus, which okay may seem a little bit formulaic, but it's good to listen to, and after listening to the whole album, it at least has some new vocal. It has something different about it that the other songs, which are so similar to one another, don't have.
Right. I actually agree with you. I wish this was covered in a little more short form. I did have a suspicion that this was going to happen because I listened to the last album and I didn't like that one either.
Mm-hmm.
I gave you an out. I remember this. I said, you don't have to pick Cloud Nothings if you don't want to. That was my out for you. And
Okay,
like,
so
no,
I
let's
should
do it.
I should also mention that up until this point I hadn't listened to anything by Cloud Nothings other than Wasted Days. So I
Yeah.
was going specifically off the good faith that they would deliver another world beater of an album like that,
Right.
or at
No,
least or at least something in that similar pedigree, you know?
right. And that's why I was kind of curious because we come from similar backgrounds going to this album. We really have mostly that album as reference. And so listening to this band and this album with that as reference, it's hard not to complain because it's
Mm-hmm.
different. It is different. This is more of a straightforward hardcore punk, power pop kind of chorusy album with a few old school kind of Cloud Nothings builds and vocal performances littered without that's a little inconsistent and not all there. But there's one song for me that stands out as the worst of the worst. This was the most blandest, nothing song on the whole album with Sound of Alarm. This was my least favorite song. The chorus is terrible too. I need to make time for me, for me. I need to make time for me, for me. I need to make time for me, for me. To believe what I can be, I need time for me, for me. And as annoying as it is to listen to me just say it, as it is to listen to it on the song. It is the most unimaginative, half-baked chorus. This was the song that made me turn off the album the first time.
Yeah.
I was just like, this is so bad.
Yeah, those lyrics make the Weezer album we listened to the other day or the other week sound like Shakespeare or I don't know,
It's just,
John Donne or something.
I was just not into this song. This song was like just not doing it for me. I also noted Open Rain. The drums were great on that song, as we were mentioned earlier. I just thought it was a little structure lacking. Another chorus song. It's got a. This is kind of what I kind of noticed as it being a chorus ender, like a chorus song that just kind of instead of the breakdown, it just goes to the chorus and then we're right again. And that was another one of those songs I noted. But I kind of
this album has a lot of existential angst as far as the lyrics goes.
right.
It's a lot of navel gazing going on.
Mm-hmm.
However, I liked Open Rain the most. Like I didn't go deep into the lyrics or anything, but Open Rain seemed at least a little less whiny, unlike Sound of Alarm or even The Spirit of, which we referenced earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole album from front to back is very it's very navel gazy. Like he's very much concerned about himself and oh god, what am I going to do with myself and all this existential angst. And I mean, I guess it sort of fits the hardcore emo aesthetic, but god, I found it a little bit tiresome.
Yeah, I kind of did too. I kind of cut off my my story a little earlier at the point where I said I wish Steve Albini produced this.
Okay.
And then I realized, oh my goodness, he did produce this. Could I be that biased that where I thought he wasn't producing it, I thought it was trash, and I would go back with ears hearing all the amazing production now, and everything will come to light. And at first, I think I wished it. You know, I kind of liked the song. I was like, that's probably when I stumbled upon A Longer Moon, and I kind of liked it. And I was like, okay, maybe because I just picked a random song to put on and tried to stop listening to the album in such a beginning to end fashion and try to give some tracks a little more attention to help them stand out to me. So I did that, and that's kind of how I discovered the longer mood was like, because by the time usually I'm at the end of the album, I'm kind of too tired and annoyed to pay attention to this track. But I thought this track was really good.
Yeah, I agree.
But listening, just picking it and turning it on, there's actually a lot there to like, and I think maybe you should go back and listen to it if it kind of was lost on you in some initial listens. But I heard that song, I'm like, okay, maybe I am wrong, you know? Maybe I was just being a curmudgeon, biased, and dilly hole, you know? So I was like, okay, let's do this again. And I listened to the album front to back, and I'm listening to the drums. I'm like, the drums sound great. The production here is great. You know, I came away more positive, I guess, because I was more infatuated with the fact Albini was doing it. And then I listened to it again, and then I listened to it again, and I just kind of had to sit there and come to the realization that my hero can't save everything, you know? His production, he can make the drums sound real good, but he can't make you write a good song. He can't make he can't make you create and structure music in a compelling way. He can only do so much.
The song structures are the fundamental issue with the whole album.
Sometimes they're all right, and as a one of or two of these song structures would have been fine. But it was just too much, I think, after a while.
Because I like the production on the album. Like I like the grittiness of it. I like how loud the drums are, and I like those cymbals. The way they sound great. I also like the distortion they have on the guitar. The guitar sounds really scrappy and very garbled sometimes, especially when it clashes with the cymbals. But you have that track after track after track for a half hour, and the production can be as noisy yet clean as it is.
Yeah,
and it just wears thin really quick.
Right. I after those listens, like I kind of just ended up back where I initially was, and this idea that I had that if only Steve Albini produced this, it would be better, washed away. And I was like, you know what? Even he can't. You know, there's a deeper problem here than who the engineer is, and I kind of came to that realization, and that's kind of where I kind of settled into it today. Is I didn't like this album. I thought it was too formulaic, too redundant. There's a few highlights here and there, but mostly it just okay, or completely skippable, in my opinion.
Yeah, very very predictable. And I'd also like to note, even though I was singing some praises to the musical production, what did you make of the vocal engineering on the record? He's a little bit hard to hear sometimes, yeah?
I didn't notice anything like that, but I also wasn't particularly super intent to listen to his vocals, if I'm gonna be honest with you. Usually his vocals will come and scream at me during the chorus, and I don't think there was any time during the chorus it was hard to hear. And then during the verses, I was probably trying to pay more attention to the music, and the drums were pulling my attention away. That I didn't. It might speak to your point that they were harder to hear, and maybe subconsciously is why I did that. But I didn't pay attention to him sometimes, and then other times again when he was nasally, I was just blocking those out, you know. And then his voice, most of the time, was just so inoffensive, not bad, just inoffensive and okay, that I kind of didn't pay that much attention to them. So if they were mixed weirdly and in such a way that it couldn't be heard, it was lost on me. I wasn't. The quality of the lyrics, or not lyrics, well, even the lyrics, but the vocal melodies and his performance was so mild and subdued for a hardcore emo record that it could have been lost on me.
Well, what you said at first really characterizes or drives at what I was saying. During the verses, his voice really gets buried underneath, and then in the chorus they bring it forward, and it's like this push and pull that's happening all the time with his voice. Is kind of weird. I didn't like it that much.
It probably could have been more effective if there was more music or more interesting or gripping music coming to the forefront. If his voice was
Yeah.
taking a backseat to something more tangible, that wouldn't have been a problem, I don't think. But where you have such simplistic, repetitive ideas, which is just, it's not bad ideas. These are not bad elements. These are not bad parts to songs. The type of the guitar or the type of drums. It's really just the monotonous, drone of them all, kind of just repetitiveness of it. That if there was something more tangible and more intricate there to hold on to, probably the vocals, seeping back into the background wouldn't bother you as much. But where there's less to listen to and less to pay attention to, something like that's going to really become more jarring and easily to notice.
Yeah, well, I think maybe that's why I stood out, because I was looking for something to listen, just for some other details during especially the verses.
Mm-hmm.
And in the early parts of the songs, like the first minute and 30 of all the songs sound so similar, man. It's just brutal. Especially, and I never took the strategy that you took. I always listened to it from like in a linear fashion,
Mm-hmm.
from front to back, rather than trying to pick tracks. And maybe some of the tracks would have sat better, but I just get to, once I get to Sound of Alarm or Am I Something, it's just, I'm done.
Yeah, and even Am I Something isn't a bad track, I don't think. It's again an okay track. It's probably does a little bit more for stuff, but it doesn't stand out amongst the
I'm just
pack.
so I'm
It's
just
it
so weary of the
right,
album by that point that
right.
it's just,
If it was the only track really like that, it probably would have a nice home on like a different album. And that's kind of how I felt about some of these tracks. Is that if I could just transplant this track into another album, I'd
mhm.
probably feel a lot better about it and more positively towards it. If A Longer Moon or It's Love or Am I Something or Nothing Without You, Oslo were kind of like structured in a better structured album, or like really the garbage was like taken out of this and like more emphasis put on other parts and a better pacing. Like I can see a good album here. I can see how Attack on Memory came from this guy, but it's almost like he doesn't remember how he did it.
Yeah, I mean, he could just like, if he just assembled some of these tracks, because some of them are so similar together,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe chill out on the tempo a little bit. I think the problem is like he's just having trouble building a bridge or something. But the math rocky polyrhythmic wonder that occurs on Wasted Days just is totally lost on this record, man.
There's not a the only hint of math rock on this album is probably the drums on some of the tracks. I wouldn't put a lot of math into this, but there's definitely in Attack on Memory. Which, end of the day, I'm just going to end up telling people go listen to that album, and I'm sorry that this happened too.
It's a tough out for the band. Hopefully they can sort of pull the songs together, like that's the problem, is that the songs they just are so samey. They're so singular in tone. If he could just take two of these similar songs and bridge them together, I think he could make more, like it would be a more compelling tune to listen to, even though it might be 6 or 7 minutes.
Right? It's almost like the band that I want him to be and the band he wants to be are two different things. And
But then again,
I guess whatever, be with the band you want to
yeah.
be, but I'm not going to listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that this is certainly, in my opinion, it's a step back, you could say. I said revisionist, retro earlier, but if I'm going to be critical about it, it's a step back rather than forward. Not that a band always needs to be in a state of evolution, but
Right. I honestly completely disagree with that whole idea that he went back to that kind of, maybe in the terms of, I guess, in maybe the fact that he is stuck at home during the pandemic and he's writing songs like that again. I guess that maybe is what he means. But in terms of
like bedroom.
sound, like
Hmm.
bedroom crafted songs, back
Yeah.
to that whole ideal. Maybe that's what he means. because in terms of sound, in terms of the songs and what's coming out of these, this doesn't sound anything like those first two albums.
Yeah, I mean the record is called The Shadow I Remember.
So when it comes to the end of this album, I think I would suggest people listening to Nothing Without You and maybe Oslo, and the rest are completely skippable. And honestly, you don't really need to go to your way to listen to those tracks either. Honestly, if I'm gonna be.
I mean, yeah, I would have a hard time recommending this album to anybody. You're not missing out on anything, and there's nothing new here, and the band has better records to be listening to. So, why bother with this?
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say, I looked up the reviews to this album during my listens because I was trying to find the truth between my biases and what I wanted to hear versus what's being heard. And I was trying to be as objective as possible with an album or a band that it's hard for me to be that way with. And there's a lot of 70%, 80%, 4.5 stars, 4 stars of ratings on this album, and I can't, in good conscience, match that kind of rating.
I mean, what is the general consensus? Why
I'd
people
say on average, this is getting like a 75 out of 100, I think.
And so, I mean, the 75. I mean, that's pretty high score. This is almost an 8 out of 10.
Right. Pitchfork gave it a 7.2, and honestly, I think Pitchfork's a little biased themselves because back in the day when Attack and Memory came out, they were kind of they were boistering this band up on their back and really telling everyone to come look at this, and had them at their festival that they have, and all the reviews from Pitchfork are between that's probably the lowest at 7.2, but 7.2 and 9. And I was like, I don't know if I agree with that. It feels like Pitchfork being a little polite to their good buddy Cloud Nothing.
I mean, let's take a shot at Pitchfork for a second, because their review of Black Country New Roads' debut record that we reviewed last week is sitting at a 7.5 or 7.6, something like that. Maybe 7.8, but it's not even an 8.
Wow.
And they gave this a 7.2 or 7.3. So I mean,
I'm gonna be honest. I was feeling a 4 for this album. It's not trash.
Yeah.
Where it would end up in the 1, 2, and 3 range. It's just so subdued,
mediocre,
and the fact that it is mediocre pisses me off a little bit. From 5 to a 4, so I'll be honest. Maybe it deserves a 5, but I'm just so disappointed that it's a 4 for me.
Yeah, like I said, I wouldn't buy the record, certainly, so it can't be more than a 5. But if the guys were in town and the tickets to the show weren't very expensive, I'd go see them play these songs because it'd be a fun concert to go to and go mosh in.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
But as far as an album, to consider the idea of the album, it's just so one note, and everything we've just been saying. I don't want to repeat myself. So yeah, I'll give it a 5.
Okay. I think this is our lowest ranked album, I think, so far.
For sure. I mean, I say 5, but I'm
not Weezer a 5.
I'm not going to be listening to it again, so I could certainly give it a 4. But I could see there's a music fan out there for this record.
Yeah, I can see that. People liked it. Like I said, the views are generally positive. There's a few 6 out of 10s or 60% that I kind of read some of those reviews and I kind of agreed more with what they were saying than some of these other stuff. Some of these other reviews of this album, I was like, I don't know if we listen to the same album.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, it has some cool riffs and stuff, but it doesn't do anything to bolster its strengths.
I,
And
I I often wonder if I hadn't heard any of their other albums, how I'd feel about this one.
yeah, I mean, you gotta sort of try to come at records on their own terms
Hmm.
because the band isn't gonna stay one way.
Right. So but it's also not nigh impossible to have that comparison. It's hard to not have that even lingering in the back of your mind. That kind of like, why is this like this and not like this? It
Hmm.
kind of based a lot of my thoughts, and I even tried to like remove it from my brain and listen to it as just a hardcore like emo pop rock kind of album, and like trying to stay my mind there, and that's when I enjoyed it the most. To be fair,
Hmm.
I found the most to take from it, but after more repeated listens, even that just kind of wearied away, and just I kind of fell back into my original view as I didn't like this album.
Yeah, it's a bummer. There's no doubt about it.
Well, we'll have to move on and check see what other albums are on the horizon to hopefully wow us. Do you have
Well,
anything in mind for next week?
I know King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard released a double LP.
Oh, geez, a double LP. That should be interesting.
I know. That's what I was thinking. I was like, oh god. But we discussed it a little bit already. But Lana Del Rey has a record coming out.
Mhm.
Juju at the end of the month. But this sort of early section of the month, I'm not sure. Plus, you wanted to
Yeah,
give that Nick Cave and Warren Ellis album the full treatment because it's been getting pretty good reviews from what I've
it has.
seen.
I've also seen that it's been getting some decent reviews, and I was thinking about it too because I know you had mentioned it, and I kind of talked about it in loose, so I wasn't sure
Well, part of
if
the
we
reason
would go in. Sorry, go
part of the
ahead.
reason I bring it up is because it's not the dynamic is a little bit like this band, only reversed. I'm very familiar with Nick Cave and Warren Ellis's music, whereas you are only familiar with a couple of the albums,
Hmm.
and so you would maybe come as with less bias, less expectations, more of a tabula rasa, open-minded about the record, and be able to give a truly objective opinion about it.
Right, absolutely. Um, we'll see. We'll see what we stumble upon. I know all the new releases drop on Friday, which is probably when this is dropping. Um, so I will have to look see what's there, and maybe we'll have another omnibus episode in a week or two. So we have the first quarter albums coming up soon. By the end of the month, we'll have every album that was released the first quarter. Maybe we'll pick our favorites from the first quarter, something fun like that.
Okay, like a ranking, that could be cool.
Just more or less like a uh, you know, people don't listen to every review, I'm sure. So just kind of like give them a please don't miss this kind of album kind of topping, kind of how we're feeling with the first quarter. What albums landed where for us.
Yeah, and people love lists, so
Exactly.
yeah,
I love
anything you
lists.
can.
Well, I think that's it for this week. Thank everyone for listening. For those people who are constant listeners to the podcast, I thank you. I very much appreciate your views and your downloads. If you can take a second to like the podcast or subscribe to the feed or share this to anyone who might listen, that'd be super appreciate that as well. But until next week, toodaloo.
Sorry, Cloud Nothings.